Hello and welcome to this event today, held by the Royal Economic Society, Discover Economics, a campaign to increase the diversity of people taking part in economics and all of the kind of professions that involves. I'm Anna Isaac, I'm economics editor at The Independent, and we're joined by a fantastic panel today. We have Sarah Smith, Professor of University of Bristol. We have Kiran Krishna, Senior Economist at Ofgem. We have Rana Alakra, Economist at NHS England. And we have Laura Citron, CEO at London and Partners. So very shortly, we're going to have a presentation from Alex Beattie, researcher at the Women in Economics Initiative. But I think today is a really good example of all of the fantastic talent we have in the sector and why economics is going to be crucial as we go forward. So thank you to everyone for joining. But as we deal with such uncertain times, I think it's important to talk about the best and the worst of economics today. So we're looking at very frightening times in terms of net zero and the need to transition to a green economy. We're facing uncertain times in terms of rebuilding economies around the world that are facing conflict. So I think it's a really good example, shows across the diversity of the UK economy, just how important it is to go forward. And I think maybe not everyone heard me explain where I'm from. I'm a journalist and I report on economics for The Independent. And a big reminder, put in your questions. So we've got a fantastic talented panel today. If you've got questions about studying economics in the future, if you've got questions about the practical applications of economics, both in industry, but in social policy as well, this is your moment to do it. So get those questions coming, use the chat function here. If you have any other queries about how to get into economics going forward, you can always reach me on my Twitter account. And let's get going. So if we could start with Alex, if you're happy to begin your presentation, that would be fantastic.
So I'm from the Women in Economics Initiative, which is an organisation that tries to kind of keep data about how many women are involved in economics at a senior level. It was founded in 2019. What the main objective is, we produce an index. So it's basically statistics about how many women are involved in decision making when it comes to economic policy, women working in academia, stuff like that. And then I joined fairly recently, so I worked on the 2021 Women in Economics Index. We basically scrape the internet by hand for data about women who work as things like chief economists, so in the private sector. We've got 14% of women are chief economists at banks, for example. And that's quite a good example of why we do what we do, because women are affected as much as men by the decisions that get made with banks and insurance, but have far less involvement in the decision-making process. So that's something that we're really trying to change. And then so at the bottom there is the index kind of result, and you can see over the course of the pandemic, so we've actually become worse in terms of gender disparity by 2021, unfortunately. We see that again in the public sector. So this is looking at women who are financial ministers, central bank governors, and leading up at economic institutions. And that has also got worse in terms of women being involved in decision making. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the different fields you can work in as economists, because there's quite a lot of misconceptions, I think, around women being involved, because it seems like you do economics and then you work in finance or you work for a bank, and you don't have to do that. You can if you want, but you can also make change and like be a positive force for the environment, or in diplomacy, or in agriculture, or in tech, and there's a lot of different things you can do. And there is quite a lot of sort of misconceptions about what an economist is, or like a typical economist. You don't have to be you don't have to be a massive nerd. You don't have to be a maths genius. I originally studied biomedical science, and then ended up managing some pubs for a bit, and then did some adult education courses, and then decided to do economics, because I was like, I want to be able to improve the world a little bit, and wanted to have a lot of options for my career. And it's a really great choice if that's the kind of thing you think you would enjoy. And then I wanted to finish on a bit of a positive note, these are some economists who are really successful women in the field, who I really look up to. Mariana Mazzucato is actually one of the reasons I got into it. I was reading her books before I did my course, and she does a lot of work on kind of innovation and how we can improve the system, essentially. She's really interesting, would recommend her books. Esther Duflo as well, Nobel Prize winner fairly recently. And then Mieta Pambola at the New Economics Foundation, where they are doing some really cool work to try and improve the way the UK economy works specifically and try and make it fairer and more equitable for everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think what Alex shows us is just the absolutely extraordinary array of careers you can pursue in this sector. It goes right from solving the basic problems that people face right at the bottom of the spectrum. If they are really struggling with their household finances, how can you make the UK economy work better for them? How can you change routes into different jobs? How can you get new skills, new training towards people? Right up to the big, what we call macro, the biggest problems that we face as a planet when it comes to working out how do we deal with the costs of transitioning towards a green economy? How do we deal with, for instance, just now, a lot of the economists across Europe are looking at how do we deal with finding a replacement for energy sources like Russian gas. So let's go round and we're going to hear a little bit from each of the women we have on our panel today about how they got into economics, but also what they do, just so that you get a bigger sense of, you know, it's not just a textbook, what happens next. So if we could start with Sarah. Now, Sarah is a professor and she's at the University of Bristol. She's had a very interesting career spanning a lot of different research projects that are very practical. So some of these have involved looking at things from online fundraising through to how do you deal with social inequality. So Sarah, if we could hear a bit from you, take us back to the start of when you came into economics, and then maybe some of the people that have inspired you and what you do day to day. What's it like actually having a career in the sector?
Yeah, thanks very much, Anna. And great to be on this panel and to see all the people who are tuning in. You know, hopefully we can educate and inspire some of you to pursue economics further. So my entry into economics is almost sort of slightly accidental. And I like when you talk to people about how they get into economics, it's quite a common narrative. So a lot of people don't really know what economics is or what it's about until a little bit later on. So I started sort of studying politics and economics, and I was always interested more in the politics side and in the economic side. My first career was in a political affairs consultancy. And it was only when I sort of started getting more into policy issues that I realized it was the economics that would give me the tools to really understand and change the world. So I sort of at that point decided to do a master's. And then I have worked in a number of different organizations. So I worked in the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which is a think tank which sort of spans academia and public policy. I've worked in government, and I've also worked for a regulator. And then sort of later on, I decided to move into academia. So that, you know, they may seem like different roles, different sectors, but to me, there's always been a common thread, which is, you know, I'm interested in understanding how people behave and how, you know, sort of policies change behavior and perhaps how to design policies to help people. And I've kind of done that on a wide variety of different issues, whether it's welfare reform, kind of looking at, you know, policies to get, you know, sort of single parents back into work, whether it's charitable giving and how to understand how to unlock donations through tax incentives or nudge policies, or whether it's healthy eating, or whether it's pensions and savings. So just really interesting in understanding how people behave and how policy affects behavior and how to kind of, you know, make the world better. So yeah, so, you know, I think, you know, economics really gives you the tools to think about issues very clearly. I think that's what I love about it, you know, so you can go to any problem and it gives you a very clear framework, you know, so you're always like, okay, now I can think about this problem and now I can begin to see, you know, what's driving behavior and how we can kind of act to make things better. And the other thing that economics does is kind of focus a lot on analyzing data to get kind of really robust, rigorous evidence. And you see, you know, in policy making how important that is. And there's a really, you know, so it's true you don't need like, you know, a very high level of maths in all areas of economics, But I think, if you're someone who likes a chart or a bit of data, I think you're likely to be a sort of a good economist. If you kind of look at some data and think, oh, I wonder if I can understand what's going on here. I wonder what that data tells us about how people are behaving. Then I think you're a sort of natural economist. If you're curious about, how the world works, how people behave, then I think that's that's kind of what you're likely to find something in economics that interests you. So I kind of, so I'm very happy at any point to answer questions about studying economics. I've been at Bristol for about 15 years. I was head of economics, and sort of trying to attract a more diverse people in. It is hard, I think, because as Alex said, there are these misperceptions about economics, what economics is, what economists do. So it's great to kind of see the really diverse panel here. But so I've talked to some of my students, and so my 3-point pitch for studying economics kind of goes along the following lines. Study economics because it's hugely broad, right? So you've seen the range of careers. At university, you can do development economics, public economics, labor economics, environmental economics. So it meshes really nicely with lots of different topics. And, if you're interested in geography, there's a link to economics. If you're interested in psychology, there's a link to economics. If you're interested in history, there's a link to economics. So, you can take those interests and kind of study them through the lens of economics. So it's a very broad subject. Also study economics if you want a financially rewarding career. So, maybe that's not what you want, but, economics graduates earn more than law graduates, engineering graduates, math graduates. I think this is a bit of a hidden secret, so, if you want those, high financial rewards, economics is a good bet. And then, the main thing is, study economics if you want to understand and change the world. And I think you hear that quite a lot in people who've gone down that route.
So it's a if you want to get rich, it's not a terrible idea. If you want to change people's lives, also not a terrible idea. So
it's a win-win, right?
Yeah, not really seeing a downside. I guess I've just got one quick question before we're going to go round our whole panel so that you hear from everyone. But I'll ask one or two questions. Please get your questions in because they're much more important than anything I might have to say. Use the chat function there, and I have to say it's just great seeing people chipping in there. We've got people with completely global backgrounds, which is fantastic. So just a question, was there a particular social problem, or was there something that struck you as inspiring, or something that made you angry, or something that you thought was exciting? Any one moment you could pick out and say, like, that was a moment where I thought this might give me the tools to fix that problem?
I mean, to be honest, it wasn't like I wanted to solve one particular problem. Actually, the thing I was kind of like working on in my political affairs consultancy was regulation. So it was kind of like, I was realizing, the profound effect that, big companies could have on people's lives, and the importance of kind of really understanding, sort of policies to, sort of regulate their behavior. But I think through, as I've gone through, I think it is just it's developed into a fascination with how people behave, and a kind of a love of sort of understanding what motivates and drives people, and how you can use that to to kind of affect the changes that you want to, whether it's encouraging people into work or reducing inequality, or as I said, even getting them to give to charity. And it's the sort of the diversity of topics, but the common approaches that I kind of find endlessly fascinating, and the fact that you can kind of sort of sort of apply it to so many different areas. So I wish I'd said, like I've always wanted to, sort of single-handedly change the world, but it's not that. It's kind of more, trying to think about lots of different problems on lots of different approaches across, I'm reasonably old now, so across quite a long career, and it has really made for, a fascinating kind of like, lifetime career working on lots of different issues.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah. And now if we could hear a bit from Kieran about how you came to be in economics. Kieran, by the way, we're extremely lucky to have. Kieran's just about one of the most important people in the country at the moment, if I'm right in thinking that at Ofgem she's working on the price cap, which we're hearing a lot about in the news in terms of energy bills rising and how you manage that. So how do the mechanisms in place to try and make energy bills more affordable for people, like the price cap from Ofgem, how do they deal with that scenario? So Kieran, if we could hear a bit about your background and then maybe a bit about how crucial your day-to-day is just now, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Anna. Good morning, everyone. So I also, kind of like Sarah, got into economics a little bit accidentally. So, I was one of those people who didn't really know what economics was about. I had a vague sense that maybe it was about money, but I didn't really know anything else. But my mom said to me, oh, I think you'd really like economics. I think it would really suit your personality. So actually, based on just that, I thought, well, I'm just going to give it a go. I have the opportunity to do A-level economics. And I found that I did really enjoy it. I found it really interesting, almost right from the very beginning, which I think is quite rare for anyone with any kind of new thing that you try. The thing that I really liked about it was almost as soon as I started learning it, even just watching the news or what I was reading in newspapers, immediately I could sort of understand all of these different angles on what I was reading and understand issues in more depth, which was just so fascinating. And I thought, I want to learn more about this. And I want to learn more about the sort of systems in the world and how they all work together. So because of this, I decided I was going to do a degree in economics. So then I went to LSE and studied for an economics degree. I think now looking back, I realized how useful all the things I learned, how useful they are. But at the time, one thing I really felt was there was that gap between, studying and being really into things like the mathematics and the theory and the more sort of real world policy making. And I did miss thinking more about that real world. So I decided after doing my degree, I wanted to go straight into work. So for a year, I worked at a think tank called New Financial. So it's a think tank that focuses on European capital markets. So we did a lot of work focusing on things like finance. Interestingly, I got to do some really interesting work there that maybe people don't associate with economics. So for example, I did work on diversity, actually, things that this panel is related to. So I looked at things like the representation of women in finance, and we used sort of economic tools and research tools to look into that, which was really interesting and maybe not what people expect to be able to do if they study economics, to be able to look at those kind of issues. But after a year of doing that, I realized I find research really interesting, and I also miss studying. So I thought, okay, maybe this is a good time to go and do a master's. So I actually went to Geneva, the Graduate Institute, to do my master's, which was an amazing experience because it's a whole different environment where you're meeting all of these people who are really passionate about economics just like you. And I feel like that sort of the master's environment and that kind of postgraduate environment is a little bit different from the undergraduate environment, I think. Because when people go to do their first degree, I think everyone's a little bit more focused on their career. So you're kind of thinking, you meet a lot of people who think, oh, I want to do economics because I want to go into this particular career. Like Sarah said, it's a very financially rewarding subject to study. So you will find people who are studying it because they want a specific job, but they're not necessarily interested in the subject, which is fine. That's just a personal choice. But as someone who was really interested in those sort of theory and the kind of discussions that you could have, I found it was really when I did my master's that I met the kind of people where you could have those really interesting in-depth discussions about what was going on in the world and how we wanted the world to look like, and how we could use our subject to make that world. So following that experience, I decided, okay, I want to work in the public sector now. I want to go more into the government side. So that's when I applied to join Ofgem, and I got it, and I joined as an economist. So Ofgem is slightly different from a sort of normal government department because we don't have a minister attached, so it's a regulator. So we have a certain level of independence from the government. So that means the government sort of sets the kind of our remit. It tells us, these are the things that you can do, this is your role, and then it's up to us to decide, how do we actually act on that? How do we actually, go about carrying out this role? And I think that's really interesting. I enjoy that kind of balance of policy making, but then that kind of independence you get also. So it's been really interesting. And talking more specifically about the things I worked on at Ofgem. When I was an economist, I was actually doing a lot of research work. I worked in this team that really focused on the future, which was really exciting. I mean, energy is one of those sectors that even without everything that's happening right now, it's so exciting because of things like, the challenge to get to net zero and all the things and innovations that we can find and do and encourage to reach there. And even just not even just about net zero, how can we just make the experience better for energy consumers. And there's a lot of exciting things happening in the sector, a lot of people with really interesting ideas. And so being able to look at what the future energy market could look like and how do we as a regulator help us get there. It was one of the most interesting things I worked on. And then after doing that for about 2 years, I applied to be a senior economist, which is what I am now. And I've been a senior economist for just over a year now. And I have been working on the price cap, which is, there's never a boring day on the price cap. I think it's probably the most, it's the one thing that I worked on where you really feel that what you're doing has a direct impact on people, where you do something and immediately it's in the news. And of course, you feel a lot of responsibility as well because of that. So it's an amazing position to be in because, you get to impact people's lives in this way, but also you really need to keep, take into account people's sort of experiences and the sort of lives of ordinary people. And I think if you're someone who is interested in economics, but you're thinking, well, I don't just want to do maths all the time, there's also a lot of room for thinking about real people's lives and their experiences. And I've done a lot of things like go out and talk to consumers, just normal consumers around the country. So there's also lots of opportunities to do things like that as well. So I will stop there for the moment.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. So it's so interesting. It takes you right from sort of the big picture right down to the small picture. And I think that's what's sort of so extraordinary about economics. And also I think everyone's sort of, we're seeing it in sort of where people are logging on from here today, but also just in general in our conversation about how it can be a ticket to travel around the world as well. If you want a very mobile career, you want to visit lots of places, economics can take you there. It's very extraordinary in that regard. We are getting some fantastic questions through. We will be doing, we will be coming to all of them, as many as we can of them coming forward. Something that's coming up a lot, I don't know, Kieran, if you're happy to answer it, is just that explaining that maths is important, but it's not everything might just be helpful. If we could just briefly have you explain that, because you've talked about how you have to take things from right capital markets, so that's some quite hefty modelling, presumably working out prices for things from different parts of the economy, but you're also getting right down to sort of I have to think about the human impact of what I'm doing as well. So if you could just very briefly explain how maths was maybe important in your development as an economist through A-levels university, but that it's not been everything.
Yeah, sure. So maths is definitely important, and it's really useful to have studied it at A-level and to have taken modules, during my degrees that were very maths focused. That will set you up really well. But if you're not someone who is really into maths, like I said, don't worry, that's not the only thing that you can focus on as an economist. In fact, I would say it's actually really important, especially if you're a person who works on things like public policy, that you sort of shift your mindset to make sure you're not just focusing on the maths. I almost feel that's more of the risk when you get into economics, to just focusing on the modeling, and the numbers. But when you're working on things like the price cap, which, as Anna said before, it is about making sure consumers are paying fair prices for energy and people have access to energy, you need to take into account real people's experiences. And that kind of qualitative data is just as important as a quantitative, and talking to people and doing interviews and connecting with normal people. So even if you're more of a people person, don't think, oh, if I do economics, I'm just going to be stuck in front of a computer, in front of Excel sheets or coding, which also you can do a lot of, but there's also opportunity to really, meet real people and understand their lives.
Thank you. That's a fantastic answer. Thank you so much. And now we're moving across to Rania. Now, Rania, what on earth is an economist doing in the NHS? Surely it's all just medics. Maybe you could explain a bit about why, something as enormous as the NHS needs to have people like you helping shape decision making, and then talk us through how you got into the profession as well. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Rania. So a bit about my journey and how I got to where I am. I think I always say I trace it back to GCSEs actually, and I had done some of my GCSEs early, so I had a few free periods, and there was a teacher who had an interest in economics, and she sort of started teaching us economics for fun, not to sit any exams, but she just bought a few textbooks and would teach us economics, and it just sparked something in me. I was like, this is really interesting. For the first time ever, I think I thought, well, this is actually something I really like. So I then went on to take economics as an A-level, and again, I had really, really great teachers who made me absolutely love the subject. And I always say if I hadn't had those few teachers early on at GCSEs and A-levels, I might not have decided to take economics at university. And that was really, I think, instrumental, those people that kind of came into my life at that time. So I studied economics and development studies at university. So I did a joint honours at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. And I thought that I was going to enjoy the development side more because it sounded really interesting. And I sort of did economics because I liked it, but I wanted to see what development was about. And I actually ended up enjoying economics so much more and being way better at it as well. And so I thought, okay, I want to do something in economics, but I had absolutely no idea what economists do. So I hadn't been to any events like this, I can say, when I was a student, and I really didn't know what economists do. And again, I was very lucky that I bumped into a friend over the summer between second year and third year of university who had just finished an internship in government. And he told me about his internship. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. I think I'd like to do something like that. And so I looked into the government graduate scheme, basically. And I went straight from my undergrad into the civil service fast stream, which is a sort of government graduate scheme. And I did the economics stream of that. And I worked in farming economics for 2 years. So very, very random and strange. I had never thought about farming before, but it was just after Brexit. And our farmers were about to lose a lot of money. And so we were thinking about what can we do for our farmers to make sure that they're okay, doing lots of analysis on different policy options that we could supply to farmers in England. So it was really, really interesting. But after 2 years of that, I thought this isn't actually for me. So I went away and did a master's. And I did a master's in local economic development at the LSE. And then while I was there, I thought, okay, I do like public sector. I do want to stay in the policy area, but not necessarily where I was before. And the NHS felt like the right place because it's, public sector, but slightly independent from government. So you have a bit more room to do kind of the work you want to do. So I joined the NHS and I've been there ever since. So it's been about 2.5 years. And yeah, I get that question a lot. Why does the NHS need economists? Isn't it all sort of clinical people? What are you actually doing? Are you working out the money, budgets? And it's like, absolutely not. That's not what economists do. We're not sitting around kind of calculating budgets for doctors and things like that. But actually, any change that occurs in the NHS, any policy change, whether it's from kind of things around workforce.
We had a bit of an intermission there. Going to pick up where we left off, and let's crack on. Fantastic, thanks.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so I guess I was talking about all the small things you see that change in the NHS. Those all have a massive team of people kind of working behind them, doing a lot of analysis, talking to different people, understanding what the real life impact of those decisions will be. So although there is a big part of my work that includes, analysis, technical work, numbers, data, there is a even bigger part, and I think Kieran touched on this, that is talking to stakeholders, talking to doctors to understand what does this mean for them, talking to patients to understand what does this mean for you, and trying to get a sense of the real life impact. And I think just to touch on a few things I've worked on. So, I've done some work recently on COVID-19, which I think everyone can expect. It's unavoidable over the last 2 years. So very, very kind of technical project, forecasting COVID-19 pressures for hospitals. So telling them in 2 weeks, you might be seeing a lot of pressure, warning them, helping them to prepare for things. So kind of future looking. I've also done some work around behavioral economics. So I saw a question about that in the chat. I didn't have any background in behavioral economics, but it's something I was really interested in. So looking at kind of greener inhalers and thinking about why people do or don't choose to take a greener inhaler. And by greener, I mean lower carbon, more environmentally friendly. And that included a lot of interviews and talking to patients and clinicians and whatnot. So I think what's really great about the role I'm in is the mix of kind of looking at the numbers, but also being able to talk to real people and get a sense of that. And I think with economics, that's important. Sometimes our theories are very abstract, but in reality, they may not, apply in the way that the textbook tells you it applies. And actually talking to people and understanding, how they will respond to things makes these policies even more helpful and impactful. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Didn't even miss a beat. That's fantastic. We're gonna go straight to Laura, but we're gonna come back and we're gonna hear from everyone again with some questions. So Laura, you are a CEO, Chief Executive Officer of London and Partners, but you've also done a lot to sort of encourage people in the sector more generally. So perhaps you could just lay out a little bit about what it is you do, leading an organisation, but your background in economics and how you came to be there. And like everyone else, if you can, I think we're all hearing about how the economists are oddly often the human in the equation, actually. They're having to work out, what does this decision actually mean for you at a very grand scale? And I guess that's also true when you're leading an organisation and applying some of the economics background more generally. So Laura, if you could tell us a bit about your career, please.
Thanks, Anna. Great to see you all today. So my name is Laura, and unlike everyone else in this call, I'm not an economist at all. But I did an A-level economics, and when I was thinking about what to do at university, I'd really enjoyed my A-level economics. I'd also done maths and physics. And so I thought about maybe doing engineering or doing economics, but because I'm very nosy about the world and how things work, I decided to go for economics, and I've never regretted it. And that's the first thing I would say about an economics degree, is you're very unlikely to regret it. And if you've learnt already in economics about the concept of an opportunity cost, so if I've got 3 or 4 years of my life to spend at university and I could do economics or I could do something else, I think you'll find that there are very few things where you won't have wasted it as much as in economics. So I studied economics as part of a joint degree with politics, and while I was doing that, I got a place on the Bank of England's traineeship scheme for economists. So I spent 2 of my summers in between when I was at university working as a trainee economist at the Bank of England. And that was brilliant for 2 reasons. One, because it was super interesting. I learned loads of things and I got great work experience. And 2, because I realized that I did not want to be an academic economist. Or to be a sort of an analyst, or to practice economics in an analytical sense, which some of our colleagues on the call do today. And that's mostly because I discovered that I really like talking too much, and not so much talking, but the bits of the job I loved the most were the bits with meetings. And I realized that I would sit for the whole day doing my model and working on my model, which was really intellectually interesting. But the best bit was that I got to go to a meeting and talk to lots of people. So what I learned from that was that I didn't want to pursue it, and so I didn't take up my place on the Bank of England graduate scheme, which at the time was quite a controversial decision. You can imagine with my parents, like I had this great graduate job and they, you're well funded and they pay you to do your masters and all that sort of thing. But I decided not to do that, and instead I went and did all sorts of things. I worked for NGOs, I worked in the public sector, I worked in the private sector. I spent 3 years in Moscow in Russia, I spent 3 years in Brussels, in Belgium. And halfway through it, I did a master's in economics at UCL, because I thought I came back to this idea that I thought I wanted to actually be a practicing economist. And I really enjoyed the master's and concluded that I did not want to be a practicing economist, which isn't that it's not a fantastic thing to do. I think it's brilliant. I just realized it wasn't necessarily for me. And so what I do now is that I'm the chief executive, which means that I lead an organization whose job is to grow the London economy. So my job with my team is to go and get investors who want to set up businesses in London and employ people in London doing interesting things. And we mostly work with technology startups, helping them to come to London and start up here. We help London-based businesses, so people who are entrepreneurs in London and want to run their companies globally, we help them to expand their companies into other countries. And I also run the tourism promotion for London, which is quite different, but we run all the YouTube and Insta and TikTok feeds for London to attract tourists, and we run marketing campaigns. So we have a big marketing business, convincing tourists that London is a fantastic place to come on holidays. So I lead an organisation of about 250 people and a budget of about £20 million. And I think economics influences how I do my job every single day. So whilst I started this by saying I'm not a practitioner of economics in the way that Kieran or Rania are, and of course Sarah is, because she's a professional economist, economics very much shapes the way I approach questions. And Sarah said this really well, I thought, at the beginning. It gives me a framework to think about a problem. And that's what economics gives me. And it gives me the ability to be quite critical about data and evidence, and to ask questions that get me to the bottom of what's really going on. So for example, someone gave me some information last week and they said, oh, I've got great news, Laura. We have found out, we've done this survey and we found out that people who've seen our ads are more likely to visit London. And I can say, well, that's really interesting. Is it that people who've seen our ads are more likely to visit London? Or is it that people who are more likely to visit London are more likely to have seen our ads? And that's a question about the difference between correlation and causation, which you learn a lot about and you do a lot in econometrics about that. And so I find that there's lots of different ways in which economics helps me to think about what we do. We do a lot of evaluation of the impact of our programs, and that's all economics. Program evaluation is all economics. So is what we're doing actually making a difference, and how is it making a difference? There's a lot of economics in that. And more broadly, I think someone touched on this as well, I find it helps me to understand how the world works. It can seem quite impenetrable. There's all the sort of power, and economics is ultimately probably the study of power. And I find that fascinating. So from my perspective, I'm really pleased that I studied economics, both as an undergraduate and a postgraduate. And the fact that I'm not a practicing economist now doesn't mean that economics isn't something that makes me better at my job. It definitely does. And I would say, you know, the opportunity cost is low. You're very unlikely to regret an economics degree.
Fantastic, and I think it's wonderful to hear about how it changes the way you think about a lot of the problems you might face in business. But also, it can be really agile, right, as a subject. So you've got the entrepreneurial side, which means that you're comfortable reading a data dashboard, be it, you know, the sales losses you've made, the balance sheet of a company, because of, you know, the basic numeracy that comes alongside the study of the subject, but also the different ways in which data can tell you different things. But also it can put you right at the front line of public policy in a way that is literally transforming people's lives. So really appreciating the range of interest we have there. I think just very quickly, Laura, could you think of an example where we're attached to, but we're not on International Women's Day here, and I sort of feel like that can get, you know, by the time you get to my age, you sort of go like, oh, we get a day, great. But no, more broadly, and I think Alex laid this out with her fantastic presentation, we are all here because we want to see more women, more people from across the spectrum of life, people that might not get the opportunity to pick A-levels at a broad spectrum, to get into this subject, to realise why it's a really empowering subject. So you had a great example there of showing that problem, you know, the way that data can look like it's telling you one story, but actually it reveals something else, or maybe doesn't, you know, as annoyingly we realise doesn't tell you anything at all sometimes. But could you think of another example where having that economics background has given you a sort of a really strong seat at the table, or even given you the seat at a table? Can you think of an example to share with everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. So two examples that spring to mind. The job I do now is all about growing the London economy, but it's about growing the London economy by promoting London and by helping entrepreneurs. So it's sort of a marketing job, but the fact that I have a really good understanding of economics, it was certainly, I think, an important part of why I got this job, because I'm able to talk about the economy in a meaningful way with economists, with policymakers. I spend a lot of time talking to people in government about the London economy. And, you know, often it's about knowing the right words to use and understanding the different concepts. And the fact that I have studied it does make a big difference in terms of credibility, but it also means I feel confident that I don't feel like I'm having to make it up. I don't feel like, oh no, I have to go to this meeting and everybody knows about something that I don't, like there's a big secret, because that can make you feel insecure. So I think it also gives you confidence to lead in an area when you feel that you're on secure ground because you've studied it and you know a bit what you're talking about. So I think that's one example. But the other I'd use is that really you can apply economics to almost anything. Before I did this job, I was a marketer. So I worked for WPP, which is the world's biggest marketing group, and I ran the public sector business. So I was doing basically adverts for governments all over the world. And it was anything from, you know, working with obviously agencies all around the world in different places. And it was everything from how to encourage people to use their malaria nets, to how to get people to look before they cross the road, to how to help people to stop smoking, all kinds of things. And a lot of it around behavior change and how you use communication to change people's behavior. And there's obviously a whole field around behavioral economics. And so I got quite into reading a lot of the literature around behavioral economics to help to inform how we design those adverts or that marketing, that communication, those campaigns. And I felt really lucky that I was able to get into behavioral economics and read quite a lot of the deep underlying literature, because I know how to read an academic economic paper. So whereas colleagues who probably haven't studied economics were having to rely on other people telling them sort of watered down versions of behavioral economics, I could kind of go back to the source material, and I found that really reassuring, because I always like to be able to do that and to have seen the data myself, and to be quite a bit critical, because there's also a lot of nonsense being peddled. And so it helped me to work out to have my own view as to what I thought was real and what was just a bit nonsense.
That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. Right, keep the questions coming. I can see the panel have been doing some sterling work answering questions in the live stream as we go along, so thank you for that. Let's start with a really sort of guts and functional question here, right? People want to get into economics, but when they're dealing with A-levels, you know, that tends to be quite textbook based. I know that I found that a bit frustrating when I was doing my A-levels. You know, it was very like, you know, here's a textbook, learn it, do the exam. But when you start to go to make that transition to university, how does that change? If we could maybe start with Rania and then come to Sarah on that one, please.
Yeah, sure. I think definitely when I was at university, I felt a similar feeling that some of what I was studying is very sort of textbook, very abstract. What does this mean in real life? But I think as you progress in your degree, you do more of kind of the real life application. You might look at case studies. You might think about real life problems in your essays and then write about that. So I think there is that element to it. And I think generally courses are changing. So I know there's been a lot of talk about, you know, how much are degrees preparing economists for real life work when we're teaching a lot of theory, but actually in reality, it's so much more complex and there's so many more layers to it. So I think there is a lot of work going on to alter and adapt courses so that they are preparing economists better for real life. And I think there's room to take specific modules. So I wrote this in the chat. You can pick modules that you think will be a bit more interesting for you and more applicable. So behavioral economics or development or something more political. And I think those give you some more flavor to how some of those economic issues appear in real life, basically.
That's a fantastic answer. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, I just agree with everything that's been said, really. I mean, so, you know, when you're choosing universities and going to open days, do try and get some sense of what's going to happen over the 3 years. I mean, it's, you know, and it's not going to be the same in every university. It's not going to be the same in each of the 3 years. So, you know, when you start, there's likely to be 1 or 2 textbooks that they use. So, you know, we're starting with people who've done A-level and people who haven't. So there's a sort of certain sense of getting the basic tools. A number of universities have adopted a new first year syllabus, which I think is quite exciting. It's called Core, and it's much more applied, and it starts with the problems that economics can address rather than the very theoretical stuff. And it also has quite a lot of economic history. So, I think it's quite exciting, and you can certainly look at that. But you'll do a range of different things. You know, a good economist is someone who, you know, can look at data, someone who kind of can think about things quite formally, possibly using maths, possibly using diagrams, but, you know, like has some formal tools to analyze problems. And a good economist is also someone who can communicate well. So you should do a mix of data analysis, problem solving, and also essay writing. And I think, you know, we are taking seriously the criticism that we don't prepare people enough for the real world. So, you know, Bristol is represented in many universities. We've got a new course on communicating economics, you know, sort of practicing different ways of communicating, including videos as well as the reports and, you know, blog writing, and then lots of, you know, data tools. Some students want to come and, you know, combine R and Python with studying economics. So, you know, we're trying to meet, you know, these different ways in which economics might be used in the real world. You know, the best advice, though, is to kind of try and look into the detail. Most universities will sort of tell you what they do in the 3 years, and it's worth asking questions and looking at what's online and trying to get some sense of what you might do. And, you know, look at the breadth as well, because I said you can do everything from, you know, looking at digital markets to kind of understanding international trade to kind of thinking about developing countries. So it's just, you know, hugely broad.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. And then maybe Kieran, if you could talk about, now that you're in this position where you'll be looking at both CVs coming through, but also the pipeline of talent, you know, you might be making that hiring decision on that next person, but also thinking about how you get more people into economics in general. what is it you would want to see in terms of a skill set when you're talking to aspiring economics students? What do you think people need to see from them?
So I think now, and this is probably a thing across sort of government and regulators and public bodies, I think we are trying to diversify our recruitment and sort of thinking about, how can we broaden the ways in which we judge things like CVs and even interviews and sort of assessments. So when I think about the sort of basic things I look for, it's about like an ability to handle data. But again, that doesn't mean just being able to do lots of analysis on very heavy quantitative data, even qualitative data, which I sometimes find is missing from people's sort of experiences and skill set. Just the ability to deal with different types of information. I think that's really important. And also when you're working in things like policy making. So, Sarah mentioned the module on communicating economics. I think that's great because I think that's a really important skill that, again, a lot of people might not think about as being key to economics. I think sometimes some people think economists' role is just to do the analysis and then it's someone else's role to communicate that. But I think there's a risk with that because you have the sort of experts and then you have a different person who's actually communicating the findings. So I think it's really important for us to have the skills to be able to make our findings accessible and make sure they're clearly understood by different people. So I think, I would say those are the sort of key things I look for. Everything else, I think a big part of trying to diversify any sort of workplace or sector is being open to people with different skills. So when I'm doing interviews and things like that, I don't like to go in with a very sort of set view of this is the kind of person I want in this role. You want to see more, are they able to, if I give you a problem on the spot, are you able to think things through? You don't need to necessarily get to the exact answer, but are you willing to sort of try different methods? Are you willing to think outside the box, but also are you sort of logical? So those are the skills that I think are important because you can apply them to different situations, and that's key, I think.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. Maybe just a very, very quick word from you, Sarah, just thinking about the stage that some of our audience are at. Just getting into that point before when you're making that application to university, do you need to see certain things from people applying? And if so, what are they?
So increasingly, a lot of universities are actually sort of putting less emphasis on personal statements, which I think is quite a good thing. One, because they take a lot of time, and two, we know that different people have different advantages in terms of who's helping them write it. The only thing in a sense is what a personal statement that is good about personal statements is it does get you to kind of think about what you like. So what you need to do in a personal statement is sort of say why you want to study the subject that you're studying. So, I think when you're preparing, try and think about not necessarily, what the sorts of things that you enjoy doing. Do you like kind of, do you like thinking about, the real world problems in a sort of social science sense, or do you prefer kind of, physical sciences, or do you prefer kind of like arts-based subjects? So, do ask yourself what it is that you enjoy and like, how do you like thinking about things? I mean, that might sound kind of a difficult thing to identify, but, I think there are different approaches. You can kind of, I think there's sort of, sort of arts and a lot of other social sciences are kind of quite critical theory, so they're sort of reading a lot of ideas, whereas I think economics is a little bit more scientific in its approach. So if you quite like approaching things kind of logically and clearly, then I think you'll sort of feel more comfortable in economics and something like, say, sociology, which which I think approaches similar issues but from different perspectives. So I don't know whether that's helpful, but as I said, I think the only useful thing about a personal statement was for students to kind of try and think what they might enjoy when they get to university. And as Laura said, you might not necessarily enjoy all of it, and actually you might not even see how it fits together at the end. But but kind of what are you more likely to enjoy?
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Sorry, I muted there. If we could, we're getting close to end of time, but something that I think I'd like to hear from each of you on very quickly, if we can, and maybe you can share links, or that's something that people can pick up from the Discover Econ Twitter account at Discover Econ in terms of opportunities to take forward. But something that we've been asked is, what next, right? Are there any insight programs, work experience that people can take to build up their CVs and experience for graduate roles, jobs? But also, I assume, this doesn't have to start at the postgraduate level, right? There are things you can do to sort of build up your understanding of the subject earlier than that. So if everyone can be as brief as possible, that would be much appreciated. So try and give it a 30-second hit. But if we could go Laura, Rania, Kira, and then back to Sarah, that would be great. Thanks so much.
Well, I'm not going to say anything about careers in economics, because I think others will probably give you much better examples than that. But I would say this: all work experience is really valuable. And if your aspiration is to do something which involves working in an office in its broadest sense, so some kind of professional career which involves working in an office, then getting work experience working in an office is really useful, or rather not in an office nowadays because it's all hybrid working, but in that kind of professional environment, because you need to learn those basic things about how meetings work and how to take notes from meetings, how to work with colleagues, how to organize events. And whatever you do as a graduate level role, you will be doing some kind of administration, some kind of basic analysis, and having to get on with colleagues and work in teams with people in that environment. And so starting to learn those skills will put you ahead of the pack, whatever it is that you go on to apply for.
Fantastic, thank you. Then Rania, if we could hear from you briefly, any work experience or placements you'd suggest?
Yeah, I'm actually going to answer this a bit differently. So instead of work experience or placements, my advice would be find people in places that you're interested in, people who represent the kind of things you feel like you agree with, someone who kind of stands out to you, and talk to that person, ask them questions, keep in touch with them, whether it's like a teacher who's been really great, or someone you've seen on Twitter who talks about things you like, or a panelist at an event like this. Reach out to them directly. I can guarantee they'd be very happy to talk to you, ask them questions. I think that is so important to getting where you want to be. And I can really say, like, in a lot of points in my career and journey, the people I spoke to was the reason I ended up where I am. So I would really encourage you to reach out to people and try and find someone that you can kind of hold on to and ask lots of questions. That
is just the most fantastic advice, and it can feel daunting, but I promise you everyone's normally actually thrilled by it, not just not just okay with it, but actively thrilled by it. Kieran, do you have any tips?
So I completely agree with Rania. The one thing I would add is I'd like to sort of promote the Government Economic Services Apprenticeship Program, because I feel like a lot of people think, oh, I want to get into economics, I need to go to university, and that might not be suited to everyone. And also, of course, there's a sort of financial aspect. Not everyone can afford, the fees or paying it back as a student loan later. So we do it in collaboration with the University of Kent, and it's amazing because you get to work at the same time in government, so you'll be earning a salary at the same time. If you're at all worried about finances and going to university and studying a degree. And also, if you want to learn economics in a really practical way right from the beginning, I think it's great. I've worked with both the apprentices we've had at Ofgem, and they're just so amazing and skilled, and I think they've also had a great experience. So I would really recommend that.
That is, again, absolutely fantastic advice. And any quick tips, lightning tips from you, Sarah?
I think, well, the only thing from sort of having seen lots of students is I think there's a great pressure to kind of get, to think that there's a making a right decision. Whereas I think, if you've got a long, you may have a long career ahead of you. And I think taking advantage of, the opportunities available to learn what you like and you don't like, but also perhaps the thing you choose that you don't like will lead somewhere else. And I think people have kind of quite varied careers. People start in the government and then move into the private sector, or start in the private sector and move to a charity. And I think, in a way, I think the great thing about an economics degree is you're constantly applying similar thinking skills and similar knowledge across a wide range of different sectors. So I think, I hopefully see it as an exciting time to take lots of different opportunities and hopefully have an interesting, varied journey through lots of different roles.
That is absolutely fantastic. And so it just falls on me in our last couple of minutes to just very quickly say a huge thank you to everyone on the panel. I can't tell you how exciting it is for me. Oh, by the way, really quick ask, could everyone please fill out the poll if they possibly can? It's useful data, and as we've learned, everything's about data in the end, as well as people. But it's just to say a huge thank you, and also just to reiterate some of the tips, tricks, points that we've heard today, in that it can be a very human-based career. It's not about just the spreadsheets, it's about taking that knowledge and then helping people. And the vast majority of this work is about changing people's lives with small shifts that can make a big difference. And I think that's what's very unusual about economics. Yes, you can also do it and make a ton of money, and that is also fantastic. And if women and people from less typical backgrounds are going out and making huge amounts of money from economics, that's also a good thing. So basically the full spectrum of life awaits you if you take this subject. Everyone is sharing their details in the chat there. Do click on their LinkedIn, do click on those links, do follow us all on Twitter. I'll be sharing some of the panelists' hashtags, some of the panelists' handles as well, just after this, just so everyone can catch up. But the main thing is do reach out to other people that you think have interesting jobs, because they can help you navigate all of the different parts of this, from your A-level choices through to what happens during your degree and then beyond that. So I think the thing is that take a bit of confidence from this panel. If you think that maybe economics is exciting but maybe a bit daunting, take a bit of confidence and move forward with it. So thank you so much, Discover Econ, for bringing us together. Don't check their resources, check their website, and let's make sure that this conversation turns into action and we get more women and more people from atypical backgrounds into the subject. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time today.